What was something that you thought was normal, but turned out to be really bad? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. Hoarding. Grew up in a hoarder house. I didn't realize until my teenage years that living in a house covered with hundreds of boxes, decade-old food, and cat piss is actually bad for one's health and hygiene. It's also incredibly hard to unlearn. I grew up in a dirty house, not horrible, but gross enough to where we didn't have visitors often. I remember doing tons of research on cleaning methods when I saw how nice a house could be if it was clean. Smell, more than anything. Story 2. Parents fighting viciously quite frequently across the scope of my upbringing, then immediately act like nothing happened afterwards. Parents screaming at each other, and then the phone rings, and they answer in a completely normal voice. I always thought that was kind of a skill. Everyone is commenting on the viciously fighting, which of course is an issue. But frankly, the immediately acting like nothing happened is almost as damaging. I had no idea what repercussions for my own actions were as an adult. I had no idea what holding others accountable meant. As long as we both screamed at each other, threw things, broke our own belongings, punched holes in the wall, etc., and didn't actually hurt each other, then no abuse happened, and we could simply move on the next day without talking about it. Bro, I grew up in an incredibly abusive home and I had no idea because it was always just fine the next day. Story 3. Wife had weird fleeting stomach aches that would flare up conveniently when I wanted to go out to dinner or the kids needed a ride to school. We chalked it up as ulcers and she adjusted her diet. Turns out it was cancer, a really deadly one, which announced itself when a tumor perforated her bowel and sent her into septic shock. I hurt my back trying to pick up my mom and put her on the bed. I thought it was a forever injury for 3 years afterwards. Even steroid shots didn't help much after the first one. Turns out the first one fixed the back injury, but I had a massive amount of cancer in my colon that was laying against my spine and pinching the nerve. Am I happy I no longer use a cane to walk? Yes. Do I miss half my large intestine? Also yes. Tell the wifey to keep fighting. Story 4. Was always tired. Sometimes multiple naps a day, sometimes falling asleep doing something. I figured I was just a sleepy person, or maybe it was because of my autoimmune disease. My dad kept telling me I had to see a doctor because how much I slept wasn't normal. Turns out it's type 1 narcolepsy, the worst case my specialist had ever seen. A friend of mine has a wife with really bad narcolepsy. He works, she doesn't. He drives, she doesn't. He kinda does everything for her, or at the least helps her with everything. He calls her his little sleepy cat. Cat nap time. She thinks it's hilarious and he finds it cute, and she always plays a cat of some kind in D&D. If she falls asleep, so does her character. She's great. Story 5. My childhood was worse than I thought, not as bad as others, like nothing physical. But those are extremes, and I need to understand that you don't need to go through extremes to go through a bad time. I was the same way. I had friends who couldn't see one parent or another because of abuse, so I figured my childhood wasn't normal, but not that bad. God asked, "Tell me about your childhood in therapy," and I said that it was relatively normal, except for the police. She asked what I meant and brought up that they were at my house all the time because my parents would be super messed up and fight. Then I mentioned that I was legally kidnapped by my mom and laughed because I always treated it as a quirky, I was kidnapped but not how you think thing. Instead of I was separated from my dad for a few weeks, and when I got home my mom was arrested. It's a two-way street because I felt like I was relatively headstrong, and drinking all of the time was, well, it hasn't affected me like the rest of my family, so it's whatever. Plus I just like to party. Then the party stopped, but the numbness didn't, and it became the only way I could really experience emotions. Had a good thing going until the DTS started. Story 6. Snoring. Turns out I have sleep apnea and stop breathing 80+ times an hour. Sleeping 8 hours or 4 hours isn't really any different from me. What's messed is I went 10 years thinking I didn't have it until I took another sleep study. Now I have a CPAP and have been more committed to using it regularly but still not getting great sleep. I think I was able to just deal with sleepiness better when I was in my 20s. In my 30s, I have a lot of days where I can barely focus at work. I pretty much had most of those symptoms, but what really put things into perspective and made me get a sleep test ASAP was my GF recording me sleeping to show me what she has to put up with, and proof of my breathing stopping. I'm 36. The first night I used the CPAP machine, I legit woke up in the morning feeling like I was 18. The thing is literally life-changing, and even though I look like a terminally ill patient sleeping with it, I would never want to sleep without one. Since then, I've converted at least 5 of my friends to get tested for sleep apnea. Story 7. I had a headache, which happens sometimes. I don't know that I'd call it normal, but it's not so abnormal that I saw it as cause for immediate concern. Whatever, I'll just go to bed early, surely I'll be fine the next day. A visit to the emergency department led to a nearly 2-week stay in the hospital, where they administered an MRI, which led to a diagnosis of acute autoimmune idiopathic disseminated encephalomyelitis. In other words, for no readily apparent reason, my immune system decided something it should attack is the protein sheath that is the insulation for the complex circuit that is the brain. It's not supposed to do that. Story 8. I thought that everybody has to go to a hospital every 3 months for a checkup, and has their blood sample taken and ultrasound done. Turns out no. My classmates were horrified when I began to explain in detail how does certain medical procedures work and where I got my scar on my stomach. To sum it up, I had kidney cancer at the age of 4. It was so bad the surgeon had to remove my whole left kidney. I really thought that this was normal. My father is a cancer survivor, my mother has rheumatoid arthritis. Going to any kind of doctor is basically a family trip for us. Now I am more mindful of how I speak about this. Because when I was younger, I used to say things like, "And that's how I got my blood drawn 16 times in one day." But the nurse was so nice she played Polly Pockets with me after that. And the face my classmate and her mother made is burned into my head this day. Story 9. My sister goes to the bathroom after every meal. She told me she had a bad stomach, but it turns out she's bulimic. Wish I could help her, but I can only support and love her with all my heart. We'll get through it, Kara. I was maybe 19 when I went out to dinner with a male friend who was clearly surprised by something as we were smoking after dinner cigarettes. Yes, I am that old. His eyes kept drifting off in the direction of the restrooms, so I finally asked him what was up, and he told me his little sister, 15 at the time, had told him all girls need to visit the bathroom right after eating. Since women on dates often go, makeup touch-up, wash the hands, he thought his sis was right. I was the first woman he'd eaten with who hadn't left, and he didn't know why. I felt terrible because I did, and I had to be the one who told him. So much love to you and your sister. Some people can't even give love and support, so thank you for doing what you can. Story 10. That repeat illnesses with pneumonia and sinus infections was just part of having allergies and asthma. 2 years ago, at my annual appointment, my immunologist asked me to get a blood panel I'd never heard of before. I've had the test several times now, and it turns out it's an antibody titer, and I don't retain immunity to polysaccharide bacteria, even with repeat immunizations. I've had a pneumovax every year for almost 15 years, and I have almost no immunity to 14 of the 23 variants tested. And of the ones I do have some immunity to, only 2 have fully protective immunity. What kills me is that my mom, who was a critical care nurse, was convinced that I had something amiss with my immune system. She passed away in 2009 unexpectedly, and I didn't get to tell her she was right. Way to go, Mom. Story 11. All of my BFRBs, body-focused repetitive behavior. Stuff like biting the inside of my cheek, biting, peeling the skin off my lips, picking at hangnails till they bleed. Having hangnails literally every day BC I would pick at them. Scratching my head so much that it would cause the skin to fall off, etc. It wasn't until like a year ago, when I brought it up to my current boyfriend, that I realized that crap isn't normal, and is actually a sign of severe anxiety, and sometimes OCD, unfortunately not the cleaning organized kind of OCD. I've been trying to stop myself, now that I notice it and know that it's bad. But it's way more difficult than I thought, and considering I still have a very high amount of anxiety daily, I just notice it and will scream at myself in my head to stop, but can't. Been trying to find alternatives lately, like picking at toys or my clothes instead of myself. Edit, I'm 23 years old and have been doing this since I was at least 5 years old. Only just now realizing it isn't normal or healthy. Story 12. Thinking burnout was just part of working hard. Turns out, it's not a badge of honor, it's a big red flag. 10 years of dealing with mental health issues and finally quit my second job and worked one government job with great work-life balance. And my brain exploded. I kinda describe it like, you are living so long under pressure it's like a crush injury. When the pressure releases, all of a sudden there is nothing to hold you together and you hemorrhage stress. That's how it felt. I took 3.5 weeks off, got a new antidepressant, and went back to work the first day I took a pill. Had 3 more months of suffering, barely functioning, until finally I got a doctor's note so that I could take time off if I needed it. Told my team leader and he basically tricked me. Asked to see the note which said I should take time off and went, okay, you are off work now. I took 3 months off, and the first one was basically just relearning how to do nothing. Took 1 full month to decompress, and another 2 to kind of settle a bit. I went back to work after 3, but I honestly think if I could have afforded it, I should have taken maybe 6 off. It's insane how much that kind of thing can affect your life. I'm still living with after effects and just trying to learn how to do things without overloading myself. Story 13. That my dad would never speak to me, like at all. He would rarely eat meals with me, never asked about my day or had any interest in what I'd been up to. But he would pounce on the opportunity to yell at me or belittle me for any perceived failure. There were never any mistakes or accidents, only personal failures that meant I was doomed for failure forever. And that meant I was utterly worthless. It never ended as long as I lived with him, but he chilled out later after getting cancer. I intentionally rebuilt our relationship, mostly because I think he's probably autistic, definitely was abused as a kid, and was not able to form emotions in a healthy way. And because I want that closure when he does eventually pass away. Story 14. Grew up with an erratic, volatile, unpredictable, very unusual, quite beautiful mother, who I thought was eccentric. And it was just normal to me. She spoke with a strong accent, and was very silly and flighty and energetic, and would enroll me in things but then sabotage the event. Children's pageants, department store modeling runways, local TV shows, summer children's events, acting auditions, pets that were gifted but always disappeared after a week or so. I learned not to get attached to anything or situation. The upside, though, was that I very quickly realized that, even as a very young child, I could not depend on her much and needed to always rely on myself for planning and safety and care. I became super independent and capable at a young age. It made me very strong and creative and self-confident. But it all got much worse later. Public fits, outbursts, arson, nudity, inappropriate language, and we realized that she was mentally ill, finally diagnosed as schizophrenic. Moved on to near constant paranoid hallucinations and a frightening death. This was all a long time ago, though. She passed more than 35 years ago. Story 15. I thought being lightheaded and almost passing out and then panicking was normal for people. I had random spurts of it often, especially in middle school. My parents thought I was making it up, even after I did pass out once. Turns out it was a mixture of anxiety attacks and chronic dehydration with the stress of school. I can't hold water like most people can, so I drink a lot every day. If I don't, then I start getting the symptoms again. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your those in the comment below.